Thank you, Bob, and thank you to all of you. I have to say I owe Dave Chapman an apology. I said, Chapman, whom I've known many years, people are not going to be here at 3:30 in the afternoon on Saturday. He said, oh, yes, they will. They love Rocky Anderson. So I will try and not be long in the way between you and your mayor, who is, by the way, well known, well beyond the boundaries of Utah, for leading an amazing set of policy reforms and showing not just this state, but the country and even beyond in an international organization that he's active in, just what can be done at the local level with local leadership. Now, I am really going to pick up where Warren Washington left off this morning with his last image. If you recall, it may have been something other than Google Earth, but Google Earth is what I can access. So it's Google Earth. You start with the satellite and you zero in, and where did he end? In Washington, on the Mall, the White House and Congress. And I'm going to deal with the political and the advocacy side of this. I'm also very grateful to another previous speaker, Jim Holtkamp. I don't know if Jim's still here. I think he is not. But Jim told you yesterday, and I think in a very organized and concise way, he touched on the variety of things that states have done, can do, how states can impact, and what the variety of policies are. I was going to do that, but one of the advantages of going last is you can see what's been said, and you can say something different. Now, I'm going to speak really from my own experience. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a social scientist. So I'm going to tell you how I got started in this, and it was a long time ago. It was in the mid-'60s. I was at my neighbor's house at a coffee clatch, for those of you old enough to remember coffee clatches, with two little children. I had a part-time job as a dance teacher. And I was introduced to a third person, a woman, who immediately said to me, "Are you a Republican or are you a Democrat?" Well, I was really taken aback because I was taught, you don't talk about religion and politics or money. I now talk about all of them, but so I said, "But what are you?" I said, "Well, Democrat, I think." And she said, "Oh, good. Will your husband be the precinct captain?" Another sign of how long ago this was. And I said, "I don't know, but I'll go home and ask him." It was kind of before my own revolution. And I went home and I asked Henry, my geophysicist husband, would he be the Democratic precinct captain? And he said yes, and I did all the work. And after that, I was the precinct captain, and that was in the mid-'60s, and I'm still engaged in politics. I served on the local school board. I ran a lot of people's campaigns. I did every conceivable volunteer job. I still do stamps and phone calls and the whole thing. But in the meantime, I had also a 12-year stint as a state senator. I ran for Congress and lost, and I ran for the U.S. Senate and lost, but I've had a lot of political experience. After my political pathway seemed to be blocked, I went into environmental advocacy, and I now work for, and have for the last decade, for something called the Michigan Environmental Council, and I've done it for a decade. It's a coalition of 72 different environmental organizations in Michigan, some of them large, some of them, for instance, the state chapters of national organizations like the League of Conservation Voters, and some of them very small, and local, focused on perhaps an incinerator or a tire burning plant in their own community. And by the way, that 72 doesn't begin to represent the hundreds of small organizations that exist in Michigan. There's a lot of different environmental advocacy groups, and I'm going to come back to that because I'm going to tell the end of the story first. If you want to make a difference, you can. You can run for office, but if you don't want to run for office, you can join with others. You cannot do it alone, but you can do it in collaboration with others. It doesn't have to cost you a lot of money, although if you really care, you will be sending money to the candidates you believe in and to the organizations that you believe in. But you don't have to turn your life upside down but not in order to engage. But neither do you have to sit there frozen in frustration and fear that you can't do anything about this train that you believe you've seen coming down the track. There are things that each of you can do. And if I'm smart, a few of you, and I can communicate, a few of you will do a few more things at the end of this conference, not just because of the science you've learned, but because of the politics that we've talked about. Now, one of the things that Holtkamp, Mr. Holtkamp, Jim Holtkamp, said yesterday is he mentioned a lot of good work that had been done by, you can call them mid-level bureaucrats or agency officials, appointed officials who really aren't in it for the politics, who aren't political at all, who may well be a civil service appointee with professional credentials and experience working in government, but not in politics. You can call them bureaucrats, but you can also call them policy entrepreneurs. Because a lot of good work does get done by people who have expertise. They may be often master's level education in their particular fields. They have an understanding of not just of the policy. They may be lawyers. They understand what needs to be done, and they set out to do it. And they can do a fair amount, and they've done some very creative things, as Jim mentioned. There is a book called, if you want to know more, State House and Greenhouse by Barry Rabe, The Emerging Politics of American Climate Change Policy. Again, Rabe, R-A-B-E, is the author. It's a Brookings Institute publication. And he talks a lot about the policy entrepreneurs in the various states and what they've done, and it's amazing. However, what they can do below the radar is limited, because ultimately we have a democracy, and the people who will control the parameters of our policy making are elected officials, or so we hope, and I do believe. So it's the people who get elected to office that really will either drive or prevent major societal policy changes. So as important as these policy entrepreneurs are, we cannot expect to really deal with something of the magnitude of global warming or the complexity of global warming without being in the political arena. It came as somewhat of a surprise to me when I moved from politics to political advocacy, to environmental advocacy, excuse me, that environmentalists are really pretty lousy politicians. I mean, there's all these people who know a great deal about pollution and water policy and energy issues and land use, smart growth, but they're bad politicians. Principally, I believe, they're bad politicians for two reasons. One, if you'll pardon me, they're too damn principled. Which is not to say that people in politics are not principled. Some are, some aren't. I always have said and have believed and have observed since the 60s, I'm in my 4th decade of this stuff, that if you look at politicians, it's like a slice of society. You know, there is the creme de la creme. You get people who are exceptionally bright, highly principled, really motivated out of the best principles. You get some scumbags on the bottom, and you get a lot of mediocrity in between. And that's essentially, of course, what we're dealing with, again, in a democracy. But there's another reason that people are politically averse for a variety of reasons. But let's take this little test here. You get to judge yourself. I'm going to give you 3 categories. You raise your hand only once. Don't vote twice. Are you highly politically engaged and attracted to politics? Really informed but engaged. You like it. You think it's fun. I mean, it's like me, a little nuts, but you're there. You like, or are you? Yeah. You vote, and you're okay with politicians and politics, but it's just a little, or God, just don't make me, just don't make me. I really don't like politics. Not politicians. I just don't like. All right. So category A is for the political. Well, this is probably not okay. So we've got about 20% of you here who are, All right. And how many of you feel you're in the middle category there? And how many of you really feel disquieted by politics? And yeah, a few less than in the top. What? They left. Right. Right. I can tell we have scientists here who know how to design a good study, and that I'm not the scientist, so, so my data's not perfect. But most people are not really comfortable with politics. They're really not. And yet, I always tell people, look, if you're not doing it, it's being done to you. Somebody else is doing it. If you think of that, again, Warren Washington's zooming in on the mall, a lot of decisions are being made that will impact your life, your environment, your kid's life, your kid's environment, your grandkids' environment. Virtually every aspect of our life is somehow impacted by the decisions that are being made there and in your state capitals and in local government. So if you're not a part of it, somebody else is. Part of the job that I've had for the last 10 years is to bring the people who know a great deal more about the environment than I do, many of these disparate issues, to the political arena so that they can represent their values and their views and their knowledge in the political arena. In a way, it's actually gotten harder because of term limits, which swept the country a few years ago. At the state level, we have term-limited legislators. I don't know, does Utah have a term-limited legislature? Count yourself lucky. Because even though there are people that you... Now, I know you haven't tried it the other way. It can get worse. It really can be worse. Part of the problem is that the first thing you do if you want to influence something, you have to power map it. You have to decide, well, who has the power to create the policies that I want created, and then who influences those people? I mean, is it a state issue? Is it a national issue? Is it done in the legislature? Is it done at the governor's administrative office? Where is it? You have to power map. You have to understand who it is, and that's not always easy. Has the capacity to make the change that you're trying to make. And when you do that, you come up. Then the second question is, who are the players? If you're interested in influencing the governor, the president, your member of Congress, who else is interested? So just if you would, shout out, who are some of the people as groups who are interested in climate change? The energy industry. Give me somebody else. I'm sorry? The tourist industry should be, let's get back to that. The skiers, yes? Your mother. All the people who breathe air. But those people are not organized. I'm talking about organized interest groups that are playing in the political arena and that are creating the policies that we are currently living with. The insurance industry. The auto industry. I'm from Michigan, and I will repeat that one. Developers. Oil. Lawyers, but that doesn't work. That's not a good power mapping answer, because which lawyer is working for which interest group, representing what? I mean, these things I'm serious about this, because you need to know who's on your side, who's not on your side, and most importantly, who's not on your side or who's not engaged, who you can get on your side. These are important questions, because these are the determinants of the policies that you have expressed frustration over in the last day and a half here, the last couple of days. I'll tell you in a couple of interest groups, the home builders. Somebody, I think, mentioned developers. Home builders are a huge player in many national state capitals, very determinative, and in certainly nationally. In Michigan, for instance, we had a policy entrepreneur. That is to say, people in the not in the Department of Environmental Quality, but actually in the Department of Economic Development, use their, what I believe is their legitimate statutory authority, and tweaked the rules for building codes, the energy efficiency factors in the building codes. And that, of course, can have a big impact in energy savings, and therefore CO2 savings, and therefore money savings and global warming. But the home builders have taken the state to court to claim that they can't, that they overstep their authority in doing that. They're a big player. We are we're an intervener, meaning the organization for which I work is an intervener on the side of defending the state, saying, oh yes, the state can do that, and of course the obvious reasons are that we're trying to promote tighter envelopes that require less energy use. But the home builders have a lot of money, and they're trying to, they'll try and wear the state down. They'll try and wear the all of the other interests down to win this. And it's, and so at any rate, we're a year into this court case, and for the last year, all these homes are being built with a Michigan has a very low, very leaky standard for building the envelopes of their homes. Now, the fact is that there are a lot of developers who build beyond this standard already, like Pulte Homes, which is the biggest national home builder. They already build homes that would meet this standard. But Pulte is not engaged. They don't want to engage against, the home building industry. They're all afraid. So even when people are on your side, and this is an important issue, the challenge of getting people to engage is your biggest challenge. You can find a lot of support, but a lot of people won't engage. And I think the biggest reason is the same reason that, well, there's two reasons I think that are very prominent. One is peer pressure. If I was brought up to say that, you don't really talk about politics. Politics engages people in a way that might be controversial. Just this morning at breakfast we were saying, you just don't talk about politics in the neighborhood or in Salt Lake City or in certain places. And we all, it doesn't matter where you live. You know, we all have certain, you don't do it at Thanksgiving with your extended family. And that's probably, I would tend to say, don't do it with your family at Thanksgiving. But we really need to engage more on the things that are important to us. People are afraid of engagement, disagreement, and being different than their peers. Being different than their peers. And then sometimes there's business interests, so that, you know, if you have to do business with somebody, you think, well, that's gonna hurt, you know, that might be a challenging factor in doing business as usual. And so sometimes there is a cost. But courage is an element that we could all use a little bit more of if we really care about what's happening and if we really want to engage in changing what's happening. I'd like to just quickly touch on a couple of, yes? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a great. Well, no, it's an important point, and it's on point. GE, the head of Goldman Sachs, there are industries that are stepping up. Some of it's greenwashing, which is to say, you know, you whitewash, greenwash. Some of it, I believe, is real. You're going to have to wait and see where do they put their investments. Now, GE, for instance, is big into wind. They are making wind turbines, and they believe that if you know, that's a solid investment. So they're seeing a pathway, and if at the very, you know, I hope GE is sincere, because I know that GE created one of the country's worst contamination sites on the Hudson River of the entire country, which has been horrific, and they've fought it for years that they didn't have to clean up. But that does not mean that this leadership isn't sincere in what they're doing. You have to. It's the other thing in politics. There are no permanent enemies or alliances. And if you're mad at and that's what the environmentalists, my environmental colleagues, well, I remember when they were really bad about that pollution site up in Cadillac, Michigan. Well, yeah, right, but now they're willing to be on our side, and why wouldn't we engage with them and try and create the alliance that we need to get the critical mass of votes to make the policy changes that we want? You have to be extraordinarily forgiving to be an effective advocate in the political arena. But I want to turn, if I could, to mention something that, I took this up here. The gentleman from Pacific Corp, is he still here? Okay, I wish he were, because I don't like to talk about somebody without having them be able to respond. I work a lot on the issues that the power companies are engaged in. And just last week, I met with the #2 guy who does have the power to make a political handshake on a Mercury policy change in Michigan. The biggest power company in Michigan is DTE. In other words, although I've been saying forever that DTE is a purveyor of pollutants that create higher levels of autism and developmental disabilities and asthma, and I continue to say, I never say power plants, I say dirty old coal-burning power plants, and I've said it often enough, I've got the press talking about the dirty old coal-burning power plants. But that guy was willing to sit down with me, and I was willing to sit down with him. In fact, I asked for the meeting, and I'm going to give it one more try to see if we can get DTE to signal that they're willing to put the kind of scrubbers and investment to cut down on the mercury that comes out of their smokestacks that has polluted virtually we have 11,000 lakes in Michigan, 11,000. You have mountains, we have lakes. All of them are polluted with mercury, all of them. And that means that women can't eat fish. Fish is a very healthy part of our diet. We want people to eat fish. But if you eat too much fish, you know, when you nurse, you give your infant, well, and before you nurse, it's fetal, you know, there's fetal development damage from mercury from women who have had too much fish in the 18 months preceding their pregnancy, their conception. So, I mean, this is good science. It's known. We know where it's coming from. We're trying to get DTE to, you know, to do different. But the real responsibility is, frankly, with the governor. Got a good Democratic governor who won't move on this because she's afraid of the political consequences of somebody saying that it would cost jobs. Now, the whole thing to change would cost 1.5%, maybe 1.7% on the electric bill, and no one says it's going to be more than 1.7% on your electric bill. Are you willing to pay it to reduce the mercury, to clean up the fish, to clean up the lakes, to reduce the autism, to reduce the developmental disabilities that are associated with it? I think the public is. So what I want to do, and going back to a couple of things that the gentleman from Pacific Corps said, is two things. One, he mentioned that it would cost $1 million a mile to transmit the wind energy. That sounds like a lot of money. It might be a lot of money. It might be you know, so much money that it's more expensive than nuclear, but I doubt it. It might, you know, I don't know. If you used the maximum amount of wind and transmitted it where you needed to, would it be a 1% or 20% or 120% increase? Don't give me $1 million. Give me it in money terms that I can understand as a public and can engage with him and my elected officials in and make that happen. Somebody was saying something. All right, that is the kind of factual discussion and information that we need to have. Don't be, you know, like blown away, pardon me, by a number that isn't in a context. Yeah. Excuse me, wait, hang on one second. Do we still have people in that other room? We invited him in. Good. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about it. But let me, to the people in the other room, we're having a little discussion. You might want to join us. And you would be very welcome. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks. We started a company when I was 22 years old in Boulder, Colorado, and our greatest achievement so far has been we just sold the most amount of wind power to any company in the history of the United States to Whole Foods.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Can you hear? No, this gentleman, if you're going to speak, you have to stand up and make it short. But basically, he said that he started a company in Boulder, I don't know, a few years ago, and they just sold the largest amount of wind energy that has been sold, and it was sold to Whole Foods. So there is, you go, you know, a business interest and a business interest and an environmental interest, and it all works.
Right, and that was in January. It also sold to Johnson & Johnson. And the way that we sell wind energy is renewable energy certificates, which hasn't been mentioned so far at this conference. And when you were just mentioning the $1 million per mile, actually the way to offset those costs is by purchasing renewable energy certificates. And our biggest problem has been selling those to residential customers, people like you and myself, and actually offsetting the amount of carbon dioxide that we put into the atmosphere with these renewable energy certificates. The way that it works is you went by.
Let's do it later. But I'm glad you mentioned it. And what this gentleman is saying, and what I am saying, is that there are opportunities thank you for joining us. There's seats down here. There's seats there and there. What? And people could move in from the aisles, but that would be unnatural. People always plug the aisles. Okay, so one of the other how are we doing for time? We've got 10 minutes. Okay. So there's two other things that he mentioned, and again, it was a good presentation, an honest presentation as far as it went, but it begged for some dialogue back and forth, and it begged for a dialogue from some people who work on this stuff every day, like me, like this gentleman, and I want to get back to that. Why your local environmental activist is, or your professional environmental activist, is an important part of the equation. But he said a couple of other things. He said CO2 is not a regulated emission. That means that the Clean Air Act regulates certain emissions, NOx and SOx, sulfur dioxides and sulfur and nitrous oxides, and particulate matter, soot. It does not regulate. It doesn't regulate carbon dioxide. Now, California is trying to change that and force the issue. But the question is, why doesn't it regulate carbon dioxide? Well, it doesn't regulate carbon dioxide because when the Clean Air Act was passed, carbon dioxide was not understood in the way it is now. People were not threatened by it. But now we understand the science, and now we understand it does need to be regulated. Well, why isn't it regulated? Well, it's not regulated because the Edison Institute, which is the trade association for the big power companies, the dirty old coal-burning power companies, won't, have enormous political power, and that's why it's not. So, they cry and whine and say, gosh, there's no certainty and there's no regulation. But why isn't there? It's because of the politics that they are engaged in keeping it. And another comment, and my husband referred to this, it's like, he said, well, we need more certainty. That's because private industry generally likes to privatize the profits but socialize the risks. But I don't mind, but I'm an environmentalist. I don't care how we get there. I do within limits, but, if we have to do some subsidies, we have to offer some certainties. If we have to, we're not trying to put businesses, we're not trying to have an economic disruption. We don't want, on the contrary, we don't want an economic disruption. We want economic prosperity that can only be achieved if we avoid an environmental catastrophe. So we're going to have to work with businesses back and forth. But, when he said that, the note I jotted down, so do you want to be GM or Toyota? Toyota moved forward. They didn't wait for the laws to change. They didn't wait for promises from the government. They didn't wait for regulations that demanded them to create fuel-efficient vehicles and new technologies. They just did it. And their level of prosperity, they're going like this, and GM is tanking. So there are times where a little entrepreneurial ingenuity and risk-taking is a good thing. Now, I want to mention a few organizations here. You can pick your own organization, but I would hope that all of you would engage with some environmental organization. And here's what you get when you do. You get community, where if it's an all-volunteer organization, you come together and you have the collective wisdom of more than one mind. And so you can decide on a strategy. You can ask, has anybody done the power mapping? You can ask, what's the best message? You can decide where it is you're trying to go. And believe me, you will not be able to do it alone. You can only do it in concert with other people. If you do it with a somewhat larger group, you can have state-to-state connections, like the Sierra Club. You can have national connections. But one of the organizations that I serve on several national boards, and I serve on too many boards, but I serve on the board of the League of Conservation Voters. And the League of Conservation Voters is the political arm of the environmental movement. It's one of the few environmental organizations that has what's called an IRS designation of a 501c4. That means they can engage in political campaign. They can say, vote for this person, don't vote for that person. They can issue scorecards. Because when you notice when people run for office, everybody's pro-environment. When they vote, only a few of them are. So what you need to do, this is the second thing that an environmental organization will do, especially if you're working with an organization that has some full-time professional people. Volunteer groups are great, and volunteers need to support the ones that have the full-time professionals. But it's the organizations with the full-time professionals that can sort out a lot of the information that you need to know in order to be politically effective and change the environmental politics in this country. The League of Conservation Voters has state chapters, and it has a national organization. It is definitely bipartisan, Republican and Democrat. There are not enough Democrats who are pro-environment, who are elected to office, and I'm a Democrat, but I need Republican votes. I need Republican alliances. I need Republican friends. I need Republican supporters. And I work with Republicans to get that support in order to change the policies of this country and to protect the environment. Teddy Roosevelt was the best environmental president we ever had. And in Michigan, where I know my history better, the best environmental governor we ever had was a Republican, Bill Milliken. So you need to engage. You need to have to spend a few bucks in joining an organization, but rely on these organizations. Most of them are going to be 501c3 organizations, again, the IRS designation, which is the one I run. That's a tax-deductible gift. Some of them are 501c4s. That means they do politics. They do electoral politics. All of them can lobby. If they're not lobbying in the state capitol, don't waste your time. If they're not trying to change policies, don't waste your time. Look for some organization that is at least political enough to be knocking on the doors of the people that represent them, at least at the state level, if not at the federal level. And it doesn't hurt at the local level either. But whether it's a tax exempt organization like a lot of them are, that just does the lobbying, or whether it's a non-tax deductible organization like the League of Conservation Voters, and the Sierra Club is both, by the way. They have two arms. Very effective organization, by the way. Find one that suits you and help them out. I was a legislator, so this is my last comment here. I was a legislator, and I know that when I didn't hear from people, I thought it wasn't important. If I heard from them, I knew it was important. If you're not talking to your elected officials about this, then there's no way they know what your concerns are. It's up to you to make that difference. It's not enough to know the name of your legislators at the local, at the state, and at the national level. They need to know your name. They need to know who you are. And the only way they'll do that is if you take the initiative to make that happen. We live in a democracy. That democracy is under threat. It was under threat in the McCarthy days. It's under threat right now. It will turn around if you make it happen. And it's about more than the environment. It's about this country. Thank you very much.